On paper, caffeine is this magical substance that skyrockets your cognitive abilities, your focus, your concentration, your attention, your wakefulness. It basically allows you to double your output in like half of the time. Let me be honest with you, right? This week, I fucked up. I usually try to get done with the scripting of my videos by Wednesday at the latest, so that I can record the video on Thursday, do the B-roll on Friday, and get done with the editing well in time for the upload on Saturday. But this week, I got a little overwhelmed with my coaching calls, which, by the way, have been going really, really great. Link in the description, check it out. So I took on a couple of extra clients this week, and I just couldn't make time for the scripting. Instead of finishing a script on Wednesday, I was getting started with one on Thursday. And well, as I grabbed my cup of coffee and sat down right over here to get started with, there was this script that I just started working on. So as I grabbed my cup of coffee, sat down on this table to continue working on that script, I figured, why not just talk about this magical substance in my hand instead? And well, if this upload does go live on Saturday, I don't know yet if I'll be able to do it. But if it does, all thanks, all credits, all attributes to this one substance, caffeine. Here's the theory behind caffeine. There are these cells in your brain called neurons. And they are what allow you to do everything that you do, from breathing and eating to studying and working, right? And these neurons, they combust energy in order for you to be able to do all of these things. And one of the byproducts of that combustion of energy is this chemical called adenosine. So throughout the day, as you do anything, and especially as and when you do something cognitively demanding, more and more adenosine gets released and built up in your brain. Now, adenosine does two things. Number one, it shuts down the wake-promoting areas of the brain. So anything involved with concentration, focus, being attentive gets shut down. And number two, it dials up the fatigue and drowsiness and laziness and lethargy feelings. You can think of adenosine as the brakes on a car, but of course much more advanced than that. If you really want to see the power and impact of adenosine on your cognitive abilities, try not sleeping for an entire night. Which brings us to the body's only way of clearing out the adenosine built up in your brain, which is sleep. After 16 hours of wakefulness, about 8 hours of sleep seems to be enough to wipe out the built up reserves of adenosine. The hangover that you feel after pulling an all-nighter, that is adenosine at play. So naturally, sleep was supposed to be the only way for you to get your body to lift off the brakes and allow you to function at your best. But then came caffeine. What caffeine does, which is beautiful by the way, what caffeine does is it takes the seat out from underneath adenosine. It doesn't wipe it out, the adenosine is still there. The caffeine just doesn't let it connect to its receptors. And so the brain doesn't register the adenosine buildup, and you never get that urge, you never get that signal to slow down. That, in a nutshell, is how caffeine works, and it's a brilliant system. I will attest to that. Everything that you've heard so far, I've scripted in the past 20 minutes. Of course, that is something that I'm reading out from when I was scripting this video. As beautiful as all of that sounds, there is a problem. And the problem is called tolerance. Studies have shown that caffeine tolerance starts to build up in as little as 2 days of continuous consumption. And once you start to build up a tolerance, that's where things start to get bad. You see, your body responds to the repeated caffeine stimulus, and that caffeine keeping adenosine from being able to attach to its receptors by adding new receptors. So you need, number one, you need more and more caffeine to feel any effects at all, because up until you've reached a certain threshold of caffeine in your system, the adenosine is still able to communicate with the brain and make it stomp on the brakes. Secondly, when you don't have caffeine in your system, because of the added receptors, more of the adenosine is able to communicate with the brain, more of the adenosine is able to signal to the brain to slow down, so you constantly feel tired and drowsy and sleepy, so you start needing the caffeine just to feel normal. That is where dependence comes in. And finally, caffeine builds up what is known as an insurmountable tolerance, meaning that no matter how much you increase the dose, you never feel the effects to the same extent as you once did. So how do you keep consuming that caffeine that you love so dearly while at the same time not becoming immune to its effects or becoming dependent on it? The answer in as simple words as possible, the answer in as few protocols as possible: do not drink caffeine every day. Have a simple rule that you can never take caffeine 2 days in a row, right? And ideally, try to not take it any more than twice a week, at worst thrice a week. But let's also understand the reasoning behind this protocol. Let's first understand why does caffeine tolerance build up so rapidly. Here is the highlight of the video. If there's one thing that you take away from it, let it be this. The first time I had heard this, it blew my mind. Caffeine has a half-life of 5 hours. What does that mean? Meaning that in 5 hours, you still have 50% half-life, you still have 50% of the substance circulating in your blood. So, a cup of coffee with 200 milligrams of caffeine at 8 a.m. is the same as 100 milligrams of caffeine at 1 p.m. That's the same now as 50 milligrams, half of 100, that's the same as 50 milligrams of caffeine at 6 p.m. Most energy drinks, a good amount of energy drinks, have about 50 milligrams of caffeine in one can. So you drinking 200 milligrams of caffeine in your cup of coffee at 8 a.m. is no different from you drinking an energy drink at 6 p.m. That is why it is so easy for even one cup of coffee a day to ruin your sleep that night, right? But let's now start to get into the compounding effect. Let's now start to understand where the real problem starts to arise. Let's say we have Joe. Joe drinks about 3 cups of coffee a day. Statistically, most coffee drinkers drink between 3 and 5 cups a day, so that's on the lower end of it. He sleeps from, let's say, 11 to 7, has his first cup of coffee at 8, the second one at noon with his colleagues at work, and his final cup at 4 p.m. when he needs a little boost in order to get done with his work for the day. This is what the caffeine levels in Joe's body look like as the day progresses. According to the FDA, even 50 milligrams of caffeine in your system at bedtime can mess with your ability to fall asleep as well as your quality of sleep when you do finally get yourself to fall asleep. It takes Joe's body up to 6 a.m. 6 in the morning, he wakes up at 7. It takes his body up to 6 a.m. to be able to metabolize enough caffeine to be left with 50 milligrams, which still is more than would be ideal. At 8, when he has his first cup of coffee, he already, again, the second highlight of the video, at 8 a.m. when he takes his first cup of coffee for the morning, he already has about 40 milligrams of caffeine in his system from the previous day. He's no longer starting off at baseline at 0. He's no longer starting off at a decaffeinated state. He's starting off with 40 milligrams of caffeine running through his bloods. And he starts over with his first cup of the day, the second, the third. The next morning he wakes up, he has 80 milligrams of caffeine. Instead of 0, he has not 40, 80 milligrams of caffeine. On the second day he wakes up. In just 10 days, when he wakes up in the morning before even his first cup of the day, Joe will have as much caffeine as the maximum daily amount deemed safe by the FDA. Joe will wake up on the 10th day with 400 milligrams of caffeine circulating his blood before he even drinks his first cup. And then he will go about the rest of his day drinking 400 milligrams more, and the cycle just perpetuates. You end up building a greater and greater and greater reserve of caffeine in your system every single day. That of course interferes with your sleep, that keeps which then makes you need the caffeine even more the next day. It keeps you in a constant caffeinated state, so of course you become caffeine adapted, of course you start to build up a tolerance. And with as much caffeine as you have, even with fucking after 10 days 400 milligrams of caffeine starting out in your system, you still feel tired and lazy and lethargic and demotivated. Where does this end? Most of us go weeks, even months, without ever even for a second not having caffeine in our systems, right? Because for those of us for whom caffeine is a part of the daily ritual, again, like I just described, you keep building up the reserves of caffeine in your system. You keep becoming more and more caffeine adapted, more and more tolerant, more and more dependent and hooked on that substance. And the beautiful thing about this, right? You are so hooked on this substance, you cannot right now imagine going a day without it. I, over the past few months, I don't know if this even is a word, but I de-adapted myself. I stopped, I went on like a 2-week caffeine cleanse where for 2 weeks I did not touch caffeine. Those were the single hardest, most difficult days of my life, I won't lie. But because of that, after those 2 weeks, for the first time in as long as I can remember, I started to feel the effects of caffeine again. Not a slight boost that you could very easily attribute to a placebo effect, but a very clear, distinct change in state, 100% improve in focus and concentration and attention and wakefulness, right? So I shared this in my previous caffeine video as well. I take caffeine twice a week. I've been tracking my caffeine usage, and I take it twice. I drink my cup of coffee twice a week, and the effect, the benefit of this is that on the remaining 5 days a week, my productivity, my output is regular. It's not that I'm so addicted to the substance that I cannot function without it, right? So on 5 days a week, my output is regular, and on the 2 days when I do take it, it is like 200-300%. That so on those 2 days of caffeine usage more than make up for the lack of increased productivity on the rest of the days, if that makes sense. All right, boys, I wish you all the very best. Make your dreams a reality, one day at a time. I will see you in the next one.